From the media district adjacent, it's time to take another deep plunge into the issues and topics that face Burbank. Let's see what we have on the plate to dissect today.
Hello, Burbank. Craig Stewart here with you once again. And this week we're going to talk about the City Council meeting's appeal about the cell phone tower on the 800 block of South Main. Lots of information, and this is an appeal that the planning board turned down, has now been taken to the City Council. So we talked to John and Jenny from Notebook LM and asked them to weigh in on this subject. So take it away, John and Jenny.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking into, it's a local issue that's stirring up a lot of talk here in Burbank.
Yeah, there's a proposed cell phone tower.
Mm-hmm. The cell phone tower.
And it's causing quite a bit of controversy, and it's actually going to be decided at the upcoming City Council meeting.
That's right, on Tuesday, October 29th at Burbank City Hall.
You got it.
Mark your calendars, folks.
So this whole project's taken a pretty interesting path just to get to this point.
Yeah, how so?
Well, there was the initial approval, then a resident appealed that decision, and now it's going to be up to the City Council to make the final call.
Oh, wow. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride. But let's take a step back for a second.
Sure.
Can you give us a rundown of what's actually being proposed here? What's the plan?
Okay, so Dish Wireless is the company behind this.
Okay.
And they want to install 6 antennas on top of an existing 3-story office building.
6 antennas. That's a lot.
It is. And they'll be arranged in 3 sectors of 2 antennas each.
I see.
Along with a bunch of other equipment like remote radio units and cable trays. All this stuff is going to be enclosed in a 10-foot-high structure that's designed to blend in with the building. So visually, it shouldn't change the look too drastically.
So it's not going to be like a big eyesore or anything?
No, not at all. They're really trying to make it blend in with the existing architecture.
That makes sense. But I got to ask, antennas on a roof, it's not exactly something you see every day. Why did they pick this spot?
Well, they say they considered other spots, but landed on this one because it best met their needs. They didn't really elaborate on why other sites were ruled out, which became a point of contention during the appeal.
What do you mean?
One resident actually questioned if this was truly the only viable location.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What were those other locations and why weren't they suitable?
Yeah, exactly.
But I guess to understand why this facility is needed at all, we need to talk about, 5G, right? Like, what's Dish's situation right now with their 5G rollout?
So Dish is in the process of building out their nationwide 5G network.
Okay.
And get this, they have 0 coverage in Burbank currently.
Oh, wow. Really?
So this facility, they say, is meant to fill that gap and provide service to their customers in the area.
So they're playing catch up?
Pretty much.
Okay. Well, that makes sense then why they need to build something. But how does all this technology actually work? Like, what's the science behind these antennas in 5G?
It all comes down to something called radio frequency emissions. RF emissions for short.
RF emissions.
Yeah, and these are invisible waves that allow your phone to basically talk to the network. The antennas on the tower act like broadcasting stations, sending and receiving these waves.
So those RF emissions, I feel like I've heard that term before, and usually it's not in a good context. Like, are those something to be worried about?
That's a common concern, and it's understandable. You hear radiation and you automatically think danger light.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Not all radiation is created equal.
I guess that makes sense.
There's ionizing radiation, like X-rays, which we know can be harmful. Then there's non-ionizing radiation, like radio waves. Those have much lower energy levels.
So are you saying that these emissions from this facility would be the not-so-bad kind?
Exactly. And this facility, like all cell phone infrastructure, has to be built to comply with really strict FCC standards that specifically regulate these RF emissions. The goal is to ensure public safety. And these standards, they're based on a ton of research and set limits far below any levels that could potentially cause harm.
Okay, that's reassuring to hear. It sounds like there are a lot of safety measures in place, which is good.
Yeah.
But getting this project approved, it wasn't a walk in the park, right? We talked about the resident appeal earlier, but can you break down the whole process for us? Like, how do you even get to the point where you can put up antennas like this?
It's definitely not as simple as just, putting up some antennas, because a small portion of the site actually falls under a residential zoning designation. Even though the building itself is commercial, this project triggered the need for an administrative use permit.
Administrative use permit, or AUP for short.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of intimidating. What does that actually mean?
It basically means the project needed special approval because it's considered residentially adjacent,
Residentially adjacent.
meaning it's within 150 feet of a residential zone, and that triggers a higher level of scrutiny to make sure the project won't negatively impact nearby homes.
So because it's so close to where people live, they have to be extra careful.
Yeah, it's all part of this web of regulations designed to, protect different aspects of the city, like land use, the character of neighborhoods, that kind of thing.
Makes sense. So Dish needed this AUP because of the zoning, but then a resident appealed the initial approval. Why? Like, what were their concerns?
Well, several concerns were raised. Some were about property values, some about the aesthetics of having antennas on a building, right in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
And others were about the potential health effects of those RF emissions, even with the FCC regulations in place.
Right. So it seems like there's a lot riding on the city council meeting, right?
Yeah.
What's going to happen there? How's the council going to decide what to do?
It's going to be like a mini trial. Both sides, the applicant and the resident who filed the appeal, will present their case. There might even be expert testimony, and the public can share their thoughts as well. Then the council members will discuss everything, weigh the pros and cons, and they'll vote on whether to uphold the appeal or overturn it.
So it sounds like a pretty big decision rests on their shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
They had to consider the city's regulations, the need for better cell service, and of course, all those concerns from residents.
Absolutely. It's a balancing act.
Okay, well, so far we've covered the project details, the reasons why Burbank needs better cell service, the tech behind it all, and the whole regulatory process. But there's still so much more to unpack, especially regarding the science of RF emissions and those community concerns that led to the appeal.
Exactly.
So what's the deal with these RF emissions? Are they actually something to be concerned about?
It's totally understandable to have concerns, especially with all the information and sometimes misinformation out there about radiation.
Yeah, it's hard to know what to believe.
It really is. But it's important to remember that the word radiation covers a huge spectrum.
Okay.
Like we're talking everything from the light we see to the heat we feel to X-rays.
Oh, wow. I never thought of it that way.
And even radiation from space. It's all around us.
So not all radiation is bad.
Exactly. And when it comes to RF emissions from cell phones and Wi-Fi, they fall into the category of non-ionizing radiation.
Non-ionizing. Okay. What does that mean?
So ionizing radiation, like X-rays and gamma rays, they have enough energy to break chemical bonds and even damage DNA.
That's why we wear those lead vests at the dentist, right?
Exactly. It's powerful stuff, but non-ionizing radiation doesn't have that kind of power. It doesn't have enough energy to cause that kind of damage.
Okay, so we're not talking about the Incredible Hulk kind of radiation here.
Haha, no, definitely not.
But even with my phone, like if I use it for a while, it gets kind of warm. Does that mean it's doing something, like having some effect?
That warmth you feel is just from the energy transfer that's happening as your phone sends and receives signals. It's similar to how sunlight warms your skin. It's energy, but not the kind that causes damage.
Okay, so it's more like heat than like harmful rays or something.
Right.
So the real question is, are the levels of these RF emissions from this facility high enough to actually cause harm?
That's the key question. And that's where those FCC regulations come in that we talked about before.
Right, those really strict standards.
Yeah, they're based on a ton of scientific research, and they set limits that are way below any level that could potentially cause any harm.
So it seems like there are a lot of safeguards in place.
There really are.
But let's talk about those concerns that people in the community have.
Right.
Like, what are they actually worried about?
Yeah.
And is there any science to back up those worries?
So some residents are worried about the impact of these RF emissions on their health, even with those FCC regulations.
Yeah, it's understandable to be concerned.
It is, and it's important to acknowledge those fears, but it's also important to look at the scientific evidence.
So what does the science say?
Well, there's been lots of studies on this topic, and the consensus from major scientific organizations like the World Health Organization is that there's no proven link between RF emissions from cell phones and cell towers at the levels we're talking about and negative health effects.
So pretty much all the research says it's safe.
The vast majority, yes.
Okay, so that's reassuring.
And what about those property value concerns? Do cell towers actually bring down the value of nearby homes?
That's another one I've heard.
Yeah, it's a common worry, but again, the data doesn't really support it.
Really?
Studies have shown that the presence of wireless facilities generally doesn't have much of an impact on property values.
Interesting. So it's more of a perception thing than a reality thing.
It seems that way. As we rely more and more on wireless technology, These facilities are becoming more common and the market's adjusting.
Makes sense.
People are getting used to it.
It's funny how our perceptions can sometimes be so different from what the data actually tells us.
Yeah, it's true.
But even with all this evidence, it sounds like there's still a lot of anxiety and distrust surrounding this whole thing.
Absolutely. And I think some of it is just fear of the unknown, The word radiation has a lot of baggage. And even if we're talking about the harmless kind, it's easy to get caught up in the fear.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I think it all comes down to transparency, education, and just open communication. We need to make the information easy to understand, explain the science clearly, and address those fears head on.
Right, instead of just dismissing them.
Exactly. Projects like this one, where there's a clear need for better service, but also valid community concerns, they create a chance to have those important conversations.
I completely agree. And it seems like we have a lot more to talk about, especially with that upcoming city council meeting and what our listeners can expect as this moves forward.
Exactly. There's still a lot to cover.
So we'll save all that for part 3 of our deep dive.
Yeah, we'll dive into all those details next time.
So join us then, everyone, for the exciting conclusion of our deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. So we've learned about 5G, those RF emissions, the concerns people have, the science behind it all.
It's been a lot.
It has been.
Yeah.
But now it's decision time, right? We got to talk about that city council meeting where they're going to decide about this wireless facility.
Exactly. This meeting, it's the culmination of a long and, pretty complex process.
Yeah, I mean, it's designed to make sure projects like this are really carefully examined.
And that the community gets a say.
It's been fascinating learning about all the steps. Can we go through those legal and procedural steps, like the hoops this project had to jump through?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all started with Dish Wireless submitting their application for that administrative use permit.
The AUP.
Right. And remember, they need that because of where they want to build this thing. It's residentially adjacent.
Meaning?
It's within 150 feet of homes.
Yeah.
So even though the building itself is zoned for commercial stuff, that little bit of residential zoning nearby, it changes things.
So they have to be extra careful because it's so close to where people live.
Exactly. And that's where the AUP comes in and make sure everything's up to code, that the project's not going to mess things up for the people living nearby.
Makes sense. So Dish submits the application. Then what? Who looks at it?
It goes through a whole review process with different city departments like planning, building and safety, public works, even Burbank Water and Power.
Wow. So it's a whole team.
Oh, yeah. And they all look at the proposal from their own perspective.
Right. To make sure it fits all the rules.
Right. And a crucial part of this is letting the public know.
Oh, so people can give feedback.
Exactly. Residents and businesses near the site get informed and can say what they think.
That's good. So they have a chance to speak up even early on.
Transparency is important, and that feedback, it's all taken into account as the application moves along.
And then in this case, we had that appeal that was filed.
Right. So even though city staff recommended approving the AUP, a resident filed an appeal, and that's what brings it to the city council.
Okay, so now we're at the city council meeting. What's going to happen there? How do they make their decision?
Well, it's kind of like a mini trial. Both sides, Dish Wireless and the resident who appealed, they both present their arguments. They can bring experts, show evidence, really make their case. And people from the community can also speak, share their thoughts.
So everyone gets a chance to be heard.
Exactly.
Then the council members, they talk it over, consider everything, and then they vote.
Right. They vote on whether to uphold the appeal or overturn it.
So it sounds like they have a lot to consider. The city's rules, the need for cell service, all those concerns from the community.
Yeah, it's definitely a balancing act.
Is. So for everyone listening, now that you know about the project, the tech, the science, the process, what's the best way to get involved?
The city council meeting is on Tuesday, October 29th at Burbank City Hall. Anyone can go. It's open to the public.
And if you can't make it in person?
You can follow it online, but the important thing is to stay informed, be part of the conversation, and let your voice be heard. Local government works best when we all participate.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I think we've given everyone a lot to think about.
I hope so. Even these local issues, they can teach us so much about how our communities work.
Exactly. That's why we love doing the deep dive, taking a closer look at what affects our lives, uncovering how complex things are, and, helping people feel empowered with knowledge.
So stay curious, keep learning, and keep diving deep with us. We'll see you next time for another fascinating topic.
See y'all next time.
Thank you for watching the latest My Burbank video. If you have it in your heart, Please consider helping us by clicking on the super thanks down below, or even better, go to our channel and consider a membership. Your support is what keeps my Burbank going strong.